The bridge of the TCNS Indomitable hummed with controlled tension as Captain Elena Vasquez stared at the holographic display before her, red warning lights casting sharp shadows across her weathered face and making her dark eyes seem even more intense than usual. "Captain, we're receiving multiple distress signals from the civilian convoy," Lieutenant Marcus Webb announced from the tactical station, his young voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Vrin destroyers have them pinned against the asteroid field, and they're reporting heavy casualties." Vasquez's jaw tightened as she studied the tactical readout and processed the impossible mathematics of the situation that lay before them like a death sentence. 3 Vrin destroyers against her single refitted colony ship, with a Vrin cruiser already burning hard toward the combat zone from the outer system. The Galactic Concordat fleet was 6 hours away, and the convoy had maybe 15 minutes before. The Vrin obliterated every civilian transport in that defenseless cluster of ships. "Captain, regulations require us to wait for reinforcements," her executive officer Commander James Chum said quietly from beside her command chair, though his tone suggested he already knew what her answer would be and was simply following protocol by. Voicing the objection, she turned to face her bridge crew and saw the same expression on every face, regardless of whether they were human veterans or fresh Academy graduates still learning which buttons controlled which systems. They knew what she was going to order, and they were already preparing themselves mentally for what would come next in the following minutes of chaos and violence. The Vrin don't follow regulations, and neither do I when innocent lives are at stake, Vasquez replied, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had watched too many people die while following proper procedure during the first contact wars. "How? Ply a course directly through the Calvert Nebula and bring us in behind there." "Formation," Ensign Sarah. Park's eyes widened at the navigation console because every species in the Concordat knew that nebula radiation could fry sensors and overload shield generators within minutes of exposure. "Captain, our shields won't hold for more than... Our shields are human-made with triple redundancy and manual override systems." Vasquez interrupted with the ghost of a fierce smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The Vrin build everything for maximum efficiency with single-point systems, and they won't expect us to do something that might damage our own ship just to reach the battlefield faster." Webb pulled up the nebula transit calculations, and his tactical mind immediately grasped what the captain intended, even as the audacity of it made his breath catch in his throat. "We'll come out right in their formation, and they'll be completely focused on the convoy when we emerge from the radiation field." "Exactly," Vasquez confirmed as she gripped the arms of her command chair and felt the familiar pre-combat adrenaline beginning to sharpen her senses to razor clarity. "All hands, this is the captain speaking, and I won't lie to you about what we're flying into today, because you all deserve the truth before we commit." Throughout the ship, crew members stopped their tasks to listen to the voice that had brought them through 2 previous engagements against impossible odds. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Maria Rodriguez paused in her diagnostic of the port fusion reactor, and in the Marine Ready Room, Sergeant William Drake checked his rifle for the 3rd time while his squad gathered closer to hear. "We're diving into a combat zone to save a civilian convoy from Vrin destroyers, and we're gonna do it by flying through hell itself in the form of the Calvert Nebula." Vasquez continued, and her words echoed through every corridor and compartment of the Indomitable. "I'm asking each of you to trust in your training, and trust in the person standing next to you, and trust that we can do what no other species would even attempt because we're human, and we don't abandon people who need our help." A moment of silence followed her words before the intercom crackled with responses from throughout the ship. Damage control teams, confirming readiness, and gun crews, reporting weapons armed and medical bay, acknowledging they were prepared for incoming wounded. "Take us in, Ensign Park," Vasquez ordered as she settled back into her chair and watched the View screen shift to show the roiling purple and crimson clouds of the nebula stretching before them like the mouth of some cosmic beast. Indomitable surged forward, and its engines burning bright against the darkness of space as it angled toward the radiation-saturated region that would serve as both their approach vector and their shield from enemy sensors. Vasquez had commanded this vessel for 2 years since it had been hastily converted from a colony transport into a warship, and she knew every quirk and limitation of its hybrid systems. The conversion had been born of necessity when the Vryn Dominion began their aggressive expansion into Concordat space, and humanity's shipyards couldn't produce purpose-built warships fast enough to meet demand. So they took what they had and made it work through the same stubborn ingenuity that had carried humanity from wooden ships to starships in the span of a few thousand years. Entering the nebula in 30 seconds, Park announced as her hands moved across the helm controls with increasing confidence. Radiation levels rising and shield stress at 15%. Vasquez watched her crew work with the smooth coordination of a well-trained team and felt a fierce pride in these people, who had volunteered to serve aboard a ship that most Concordat officers considered a death trap. The Indomitable might not have the sleek lines of a Concordat cruiser or the devastating firepower of a Vryn battleship, but it had something more valuable in her estimation. It had a crew that refused to quit. The ship plunged into the nebula, and immediately the view screen dissolved into a chaos of color as radiation played across their shields in sheets of purple and gold. Warning klaxons began to sound as shield strength dropped to 70%, then 60%, then 50%, and systems throughout the ship started to complain about the electromagnetic interference. Engineering reports Reactor 2 is fluctuating. Chun called out over the noise as he monitored the ship's status displays. Rodriguez is compensating manually down in engineering. Rodriguez didn't hear the report as she was too busy rerouting power conduits with her bare hands while standing in a radiation field that would kill most species within minutes. But human biology was stubborn and human engineering was redundant, and she had a job to do. Regardless of what the safety protocols recommended, shield strength at 40%. Park reported as the Indomitable drove deeper into the maelstrom. Transit time to emergence point is 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like an eternity as the ship shuddered and groaned under the assault of radiation and gravitational shear forces. But Vasquez sat motionless in her command chair and projected an aura of absolute confidence that steadied the nerves of everyone who could see her. Tactical. Prepare firing solutions for all 3 destroyers, she ordered calmly, as if they were running a simple drill instead of gambling their lives on a desperate rescue attempt. I want full spreads ready the moment we clear the nebula, and Webb, I need you to target their weapon systems first, because if we can cripple their offensive capability, they can't hurt the convoy. Aye, Captain, Webb responded as his fingers danced across the tactical controls and programmed targeting priorities into the weapon systems. Solutions locked and missile tubes are loaded. 30 seconds to emergence. Park counted down as sweat beaded on her forehead from the concentration required to navigate through the turbulent space. Shield strength at 35% and holding. Vasquez leaned forward in her chair as the seconds ticked away, and her mind ran through the tactical scenarios one final time. They would have perhaps 5 seconds of surprise before the Vryn realized what was happening, and in those 5 seconds, they needed to do as much damage as possible. 10 seconds. Park announced. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Indomitable burst from the nebula like a missile from a launch tube, and suddenly they were in clear space with 3 Vryn destroyers spread out before them at point-blank range in stellar combat terms. The enemy ships were sleek predatory vessels of dark metal and glowing red energy conduits, all focused on the fleeing convoy transports for one frozen heartbeat. Nobody moved as the Vryn crews stared at their sensors in disbelief at the impossible contact that had just appeared in the middle of their formation. Then, Vasquez's voice rang out across the bridge with absolute authority and deadly intent. "All guns, fire at will." The Indomitable's weapon systems erupted in a symphony of controlled destruction as missiles, streaked from their launch tubes and railgun rounds, tore through the void at relativistic velocities. Lieutenant Webb's targeting solutions proved devastatingly accurate as the first salvo caught the nearest Vryn destroyer, completely unprepared with its shields oriented toward the convoy instead of behind where threats weren't supposed to appear aboard the Vryn destroyer Relentless Fury. Commander Thale felt his confidence shatter like brittle glass as proximity alarms shrieked their warnings too late to prevent the human missiles from impacting his ship's port weapon clusters. He had fought 17 engagements against Concordat forces, and never once had an enemy vessel done something as tactically insane as flying through a radiation nebula just to achieve surprise. All ships, combat formation Gamma, and focus fire on that human vessel. Thale transmitted to his formation, even as his own ship shuddered under the impact of human railgun fire that punched through armor plating designed to withstand energy weapons. How did they penetrate our sensor perimeter without detection? His tactical officer's response came through gritted teeth as another impact rocked the bridge and sent sparks cascading from overhead conduits. "Commander, they came directly through the Calver Nebula, and our sensors registered them as a radiation anomaly until they were already on top of us." Thale's four eyes narrowed in something approaching respect because he had studied human combat doctrine during his strategic training, and every report emphasized their preference for straightforward, overwhelming force. This level of cunning suggested the humans were evolving their tactics faster than Vryn intelligence had predicted on the Indomitable's bridge. Vasquez watched the tactical display update in real time as her opening salvo crippled one destroyer's weapon systems and forced the other two to break formation. "Helm, bring us about to heading 270 and keep us between the destroyers and the convoy," she ordered, while her mind calculated angles and velocities with the practiced ease of someone who had survived too many battles to count. "Captain, the lead destroyer is turning to engage us," Webb reported as his console lit up with new threat indicators. "They're charging main weapons, and I'm reading significant energy buildup in their forward batteries." "Let them," Vasquez replied with cold certainty. "Our armor is thick, and our redundant systems mean we can take hits that would mission kill their vessels, and Rodriguez designed our damage control protocols specifically for sustained punishment." Chun glanced at his captain with a mixture of concern and admiration because he knew what she was doing, even if the reasoning seemed counterintuitive to standard naval doctrine. By presenting themselves as an obvious threat, the Indomitable drew enemy fire away from the fragile civilian transports and bought them precious time to escape deeper into the asteroid field. The first Vryn energy barrage struck the Indomitables forward shields like the hammer of an angry god, and the entire ship rang like a bell as shield generators screamed in protest. Park fought to keep the ship steady as the helm controls bucked in her hands and warning lights painted the bridge in shades of amber and red. "Forward shields down to 60%. Chun announced as he monitored the defensive systems. "Hull breaches reported in Sections 7 and 12, and damage control teams are responding." In Section 7, Petty Officer Jackson slapped an emergency seal over a meter-wide hole in the hull as atmosphere vented into space with a sound like a dying scream. His training took over as he worked with mechanical efficiency to stabilize the breach while his team pulled wounded crewmen back from the danger zone. "Medical team to Section 7. Jackson called into his headset as he surveyed the damage. "I've got 3 wounded and 1 KIA, and we need corpsmen here now." But there was no time to mourn the dead, because another hit shook the ship and Jackson had to grab a support beam to avoid being thrown across the corridor. Somewhere deeper in the vessel, Rodriguez was routing power around damaged conduits and cursing in fluent Spanish as she performed repairs that would make a safety inspector faint with horror. "Webb, I need a firing solution on that lead destroyer's bridge section. Vasquez commanded as she studied the tactical display and recognized a pattern in the enemy's movements. They're trying to herd us away from the convoy, and that means their commander is thinking 3 moves ahead. Webb's fingers flew across his console as he calculated trajectories and adjusted for the relative motion of both vessels. Solution locked, Captain, but it's a low percentage shot given our current angle and their evasive maneuvers. Take it anyway, Vasquez ordered. Sometimes you make your own luck through volume of fire. The Indomitable's main railgun spoke with a deep thrumming vibration that could be felt throughout the ship's superstructure. The tungsten penetrator round crossed the distance between vessels in less than a second and missed the Rin destroyer's bridge by 17 meters before continuing into deep space, where it would travel until the heat death of the universe. But the near miss had the desired effect, as the Rin commander flinched away from his aggressive approach and momentarily broke his attack vector. In that brief window of opportunity, Webb launched a spread of missiles that tracked toward the destroyer with relentless determination. Thale watched the incoming missiles and made a split-second decision that he would question later if he survived this engagement. Emergency power to point defense systems and prepare for evasive maneuvers. He commanded even as his tactical instincts screamed that he was being manipulated by an opponent who understood Rin doctrine too well. The destroyer's point defense. Lasers began tracking and eliminating missiles with mechanical precision. 3 missiles destroyed then, 5 then 8. But human weapons were cheap and numerous compared to the elegant but expensive Rin systems. And there were simply too many targets for the limited number of defensive batteries. 2 missiles broke through the defensive screen and detonated against the destroyer's starboard flank in blossoms of nuclear fire. The explosions sipped away armor and exposed the delicate internal systems to the vacuum of space, where they promptly failed in cascading sequences. Damage report, Thale demanded as his bridge crew worked frantically to contain the fires and restore functionality to damaged systems. What's our combat effectiveness? Starboard weapons offline and maneuvering thrusters at 60% capacity, his tactical officer reported with the clinical detachment of someone reporting their own death sentence. Shield generators 3 and 4 are destroyed, and we're venting atmosphere from decks 9 through 12. For the first time in his military career, Thale felt genuine fear because humans weren't supposed to fight like this. They were supposed to be the unsophisticated newcomers to galactic warfare who relied on primitive nuclear weapons and kinetic kill vehicles. They weren't supposed to set traps and anticipate his moves and damage his vessel this badly in the opening minutes of combat. Signal the eternal pride and the swift vengeance, Thale ordered after swallowing his pride along with his fear. Coordinate our fire on the human vessel and target their engineering section, because if we can disable their propulsion, they become a stationary target. On the Indomitable, Chun watched 3 new threat indicators appear on the tactical display as all 3 Rin destroyers began maneuvering for coordinated firing positions. Captain, they're setting up a crossfire, and if they catch us in that kill zone, our shields won't hold against concentrated fire. Vasquez nodded slowly as she considered the tactical problem, and then a dangerous smile crossed her face. Webb, what's the current status of the debris field from our first missile strike? Webb pulled up the sensor data, and his eyes widened as he grasped what his captain was suggesting. Significant amount of metallic debris in a roughly spherical cloud. Approximately 2 kilometers in diameter, and it's drifting on a vector that will intersect with the Vrin formation in 90 seconds. And if we were to accelerate that debris field with a carefully placed railgun barrage, Vasquez prompted, what would be the effect on ships attempting to maintain fixed firing positions? It would force them to maneuver or take significant hull damage from high-velocity impacts. Webb concluded with growing excitement. Captain, that's brilliant, because they'll have to choose between maintaining their crossfire or protecting their hulls. Make it happen. Vasquez ordered. "And while they're dodging debris, I want you to put everything we have into the damaged destroyer, because a wounded predator is still dangerous, but a dead one isn't." The Indomitable's railguns began firing in rapid succession, and each shot carefully calculated to impact the debris field at specific points. The effect was like kicking an anthill, as thousands of metal fragments suddenly accelerated toward the Vrin formation like a swarm of angry hornets. Thale watched his tactical display with mounting horror as the debris cloud transformed from a minor navigational hazard into a lethal threat. "Invasive maneuvers now," he commanded as his ship began to turn away from its planned firing position. Captain Vasquez stared at the tactical display as the Vring cruisers marker pulsed with malevolent intent, and for a moment she wasn't on the bridge of the Indomitable, but standing in the ruins of New Seattle Colony, watching smoke rise from what had once been her home, her daughter's school, her husband's research facility, all reduced to rubble by a Vrin raid that military intelligence had assured everyone wouldn't happen. "Captain?" Chum's voice pulled her back to the present, and she realized her hands had clenched into fists on the arms of her command chair. "Your orders?" She forced herself to relax and to think tactically instead of emotionally, because revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford when her crew's lives depended on her clarity of thought. "How much time before the cruiser enters effective weapons range?" she asked Webb with carefully controlled calm. 11 minutes at their current burn rate," Webb replied while his fingers moved across the tactical console updating threat assessments. "Captain, conventional engagement against a cruiser with our current ammunition levels would be suicide, and even if we somehow damaged it, the 2 destroyer escorts would finish. Use off. Then, we don't engage conventionally," Vasquez stated as she pulled up the ship's cargo manifest on her command console. "Chun, what happened to those mining charges we were supposed to deliver to the Kepler station before we got diverted to convoy escort duty?" Chen's eyebrows rose as understanding dawned, and he quickly accessed the cargo records. "Still in hold 348. Type 7 fusion mining charges rated for asteroid demolition, and Captain, those aren't designed to be used as weapons. Neither was the Indomitable before we mounted guns on it," Vasquez countered with a thin smile. "Get Rodriguez on the line and tell her I need those charges rigged for remote detonation within 8 minutes, and I don't care if it's technically impossible because we're fresh out of technically possible options." In the engineering section, Rodriguez received the order and laughed, without any humor, because of course the captain wanted her to jury-rig mining explosives into improvised weapons during active combat operations. "You heard the captain," she shouted to her team over the noise of damaged systems and emergency repair work. "Martinez, grab the detonator kits from storage, and Chun, I need you in hold 3 with a cargo loader right now." The engineering crew moved with practiced efficiency, born from months of impossible repair jobs and creative problem-solving under combat conditions. They were human, and humans had been making tools and weapons from whatever materials were available since their ancestors first picked up rocks and decided to improve on nature's design. On the bridge, Vasquez was already formulating the tactical plan that would either save her crew or kill them all. "Park, I need you to plot a course that takes us back toward the nebula's edge and make it look like we're running scared." "Captain, if we retreat, the Vrin will pursue, and that puts us exactly where they want us," Park protested even as her hands began entering the navigation calculations. "Exactly," Vasquez agreed. "Webb, can you map the nebula's magnetic field topology and identify areas of high instability?" Webb pulled up the sensor data they had collected during their initial transit and began analyzing the complex interaction of magnetic fields and charged particles. "There are several regions where the magnetic field lines are twisted into what looks like standing wave patterns," he reported. "Any ship passing through those areas would experience significant electromagnetic interference, and possible systems disruption. Perfect, Vasquez said, as the pieces of her plan fell into place with satisfying precision. Here's what we're going to do, and I'll be honest, this is either brilliant or completely insane, and I'm not entirely sure which. She outlined her strategy to the bridge crew and watched their expressions shift from confusion to comprehension, to a kind of awestruck disbelief that anyone would attempt something this audacious. Chun actually laughed when she finished explaining the third phase because it was either that or question his captain's sanity. Captain, this plan violates about 17 different naval engagement protocols. Chun pointed out, though his tone suggested he didn't actually care about the protocols at this particular moment. Added to the list of regulations I've broken today. Vasquez replied, "Come. Open a channel to the convoy ships on encrypted frequency." The communication officer nodded, and a moment later, the channel opened to reveal a split screen showing the captains of 3 different convoy vessels. A Tauran freighter captain with her distinctive blue-tinted skin and concerned expression. A Kalathi transport commander whose forearms were gesturing in what might have been either prayer or agitation. And a human merchant captain who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. "This is Captain Vasquez of the Indomitable," she began without preamble. "I need you to listen carefully because I don't have time to repeat this, and what I'm about to ask you to do goes against every survival instinct you possess." The Tauran captain spoke first, and her translator rendered her melodic language into flat standard. "Captain Vasquez, you have already saved our lives at great cost to your own vessel, and we owe you a debt that cannot be easily repaid." "I'm not calling to collect debts," Vasquez interrupted. "I'm calling to tell you that we're about to engage a ring cruiser, and the only way we survive is if you help us by doing exactly what I say when I say it." The Kalathi commander's arms stopped moving, and all 4 focused on the screen with sudden intensity. "You wish us to fight?" he asked in disbelief. "Our vessels are unarmed civilian transports without weapons or defensive systems. I don't need you to fight," Vasquez clarified. "I need you to run, and when you run, I need you to broadcast on all frequencies that you're fleeing toward coordinates that I'm going to provide, and you need to make it sound convincing." The human merchant captain squinted at her suspiciously. "You're using us as bait," he stated rather than asked. "I'm using you as a lure to position enemy forces exactly where I want them," Vasquez corrected. "There's a difference, and if this works, you'll be safely clear of the combat zone before the shooting starts. And if it doesn't work, then we're all dead anyway, so it won't matter." There was a long pause as the convoy captains considered her words and weighed their limited options. Finally, the Tauran captain inclined her head in what might have been acceptance or resignation. "We have witnessed human courage today, and it has impressed us greatly," she said quietly. "If you believe this plan will save both your crew and ours, then we will trust in your judgment. Transmit those coordinates in 5 minutes and make your burn look panicked," Vasquez instructed. "And thank you for trusting me, because I know it's not easy to put your lives in the hands of someone you just met." The channel closed and Vasquez turned her attention back to the tactical situation as the Vrin cruiser continued its relentless approach. "Rodriguez, status on those mining charges?" She called down to engineering. "Charges are rigged and ready for deployment." Rodriguez's voice came back slightly distorted by interference. "Captain, I feel obligated to point out that these things weren't designed for vacuum deployment, and there's about a 30% chance they'll detonate prematurely if we're not careful with the handling." "I'll take those odds," Vasquez replied. "Stand by for cargo deployment on my mark, and Rodriguez, this is probably going to get rough, so make sure your people are strapped in." "Understood, Captain," Rodriguez acknowledged. "Engineering is secured, and we're ready for whatever insanity you're planning." The next few minutes passed with agonizing slowness as all the pieces moved into position like a game of chess played at interstellar scales. The convoy began broadcasting their panicked distress calls and burning toward coordinates that would take them past the nebula's edge. The Vryn cruiser adjusted course to intercept them because obviously the humans were trying to protect their charges, even at the cost of their own. Vessel commander Thale watched from his damaged destroyer as the cruiser, Inevitable Justice, moved to engage the fleeing convoy and felt a growing sense of unease. The human captain had proven herself to be cunning and resourceful, and this retreat felt too convenient after her previous tactical innovations. Signal the Inevitable Justice, Thale transmitted. Advise them to maintain high alert status because this may be a deception. But the cruiser's captain was young and confident in his vessel's superior firepower, and he dismissed the warning with the casual arrogance of someone who had never faced an opponent willing to do the impossible. Your concern is noted, Commander Thale, but these humans have expended most of their ammunition, and their vessel is clearly damaged, came the reply. We will eliminate them quickly, and then deal with the convoy at our leisure. Vasquez watched the Vryn cruiser commit to its intercept course and felt a fierce satisfaction because the enemy had taken the bait exactly as she had hoped. Bark, execute evasive pattern Delta 7 and make it look good, she ordered. I want them to think we're desperately trying to cover the convoy's retreat. The Indomitable began a series of seemingly random course changes that brought it closer to the nebula's edge while staying just barely ahead of the cruiser's effective weapons range. The tactical display painted a picture of inevitable defeat as Captain Vasquez studied the incoming Vryn battle group with the dispassionate eye of someone who had long ago made peace with mortality. 2 cruisers and 6 destroyers against her. Single battered warship with depleted ammunition and damaged systems. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. Come, open a channel to the convoy, Vasquez ordered as she made the only decision her conscience would allow. Tell them to run at maximum burn, and don't look back and don't wait for us. The Tauren freighter captain's face appeared on the screen, and her blue features showed an expression that translated clearly across species barriers as shock and refusal. Captain Vasquez, you cannot mean to face that fleet alone, she protested. Your tactical advantage is exhausted, and your vessel cannot possibly survive. That's exactly why you need to run. Vasquez replied with gentle firmness. We bought you time and distance, and now you need to use both to get clear of this system and report to Concordat Command what happened here today. This is not acceptable. The Kalathi transport commander's voice joined the conversation. Your species has a saying about leaving no one behind, and we have learned today that humans practice what they preach, and we would be dishonored if we did not attempt to do the same. Vasquez felt something tighten in her chest at the alien's words because she had expected them to flee without argument as any rational being would when faced with overwhelming force. I appreciate the sentiment, she said carefully, but your ships are unarmed, and your presence would only give us additional targets to defend instead of helping the tactical situation. The human merchant captain leaned forward on his own screen, and his weathered face showed a stubborn determination that Vasquez recognized because she saw it in the mirror every morning. With respect, Captain, you don't get to decide who lives and who dies today, he stated flatly. My ship might not have military weapons, but I've got a fusion drive that makes a hell of an explosion. If I ram it into something, and I'm betting, these Vryn bastards won't expect the civilian to go kamikaze on their formation. Absolutely not. Vasquez snapped with uncharacteristic heat. I'm not asking civilians to sacrifice themselves, and that's final. But before the argument could continue, Chun interrupted with a report that changed the tactical equation entirely. Captain, I'm reading power fluctuations in our damaged sections, and Rodriguez says she can't keep the reactor stable much longer without a full shutdown and restart sequence. Vasquez closed her eyes briefly as the last of her tactical options evaporated like Morning dew. How long would a restart take? She asked, though she already knew the answer would be unacceptable. Minimum 15 minutes. Chun replied. And during that time, we'd be completely without power for weapons and shields and maneuvering, which meant they would be a helpless target for the incoming Vrin battle group, and there would be no clever tricks or desperate gambits. This time, because you couldn't bluff when your cards were face up on the table for everyone to see. Belay the restart. Vasquez decided, we'll fight with what we have until the reactor gives out, and then we'll fight with whatever's left after that. She turned back to the convoy channel, where the three captains were still waiting for her response. I'm ordering you one final time to leave this system immediately, she said with all the authority she could muster. That's not a request. That's a direct command, and if you have any respect for what we've done here today, you'll honor it by surviving to tell the story. The channel went silent for a long moment before the Taran captain spoke again, and her voice carried a weight of decision that resonated across the cultural divide. Captain Vasquez, we three have conferred during your conversation with your first officer, she began, and we have decided unanimously that we will not abandon you to face this threat alone, regardless of your orders or our lack of weapons. We are civilians, yes, the Kalathi added, but we are not cowards, and today we witnessed what it means to stand between danger and those who cannot defend themselves, and we choose to stand with you, even if our contribution is merely to draw enemy fire away from your vessel. The human merchant captain nodded agreement. Besides, he added with a grim smile, I've been hauling cargo for 30 years, and I'm tired of running from bullies, and maybe it's time someone showed these Vrin that even unarmed humans are dangerous when we're angry. Vasquez felt her carefully. Maintained emotional control cracked slightly because she had spent so long being the strong one who made the hard decisions that she had forgotten what it felt like to have people choose to stand beside her instead of behind her. You're all insane, she said, but her voice lacked any real censure. We learn from the best. The Tauren replied. Now, what are your orders, Captain? Before Vasquez could respond, the COM system chimed with an incoming transmission on Vrin. Military frequencies, and she gestured for the communications officer to put it through. The screen split to show Commander Thale's face alongside the convoy captains. Captain Vasquez. Thale began, and his translator rendered his words with careful precision. I am Commander Thale of the Vrin Dominion, and I witnessed your tactical abilities firsthand today, and I find myself in the unusual position of respecting an enemy. Is this the part where you offer me honorable surrender? Vasquez asked with more calm than she felt. Because if so, you should know that humans don't surrender when there are still people depending on us. I suspected as much, Thale replied, which is why I wish to speak with you before the battle group arrives and ends this engagement in the Boiserers. Only way such numerical superiority can end, and I wanted you to know that your tactics today will be studied in our war colleges, and your crew's courage will be remembered. That's very kind, Vasquez said with heavy irony. But if you're waiting for me to gracefully accept defeat, you're going to be disappointed. Because we're going to fight until our weapons are empty and our ship is dead, and then we'll fight with whatever we can. Throw out the airlocks? Thale's expression shifted into something that might have been approval or sadness, depending on how one interpreted Vrin facial movements. I know, he said quietly, and that is precisely why humanity terrifies us more than any other species we have encountered. Because you do not calculate acceptable losses or negotiate strategic withdrawals, and you fight as if every battle is your last regardless of the tactical situation. That's because every battle might be our last, Vasquez replied, and we'd rather die standing than live kneeling. And if that terrifies you, then maybe you should reconsider your aggressive expansion into Concordat space. The transmission ended as Thale's image vanished from the screen, leaving only the convoy captains, and Vasquez spent a moment composing herself before addressing her unlikely allies. If you're determined to stay, Then we need to coordinate our efforts. She began. Your ships have powerful engines and good maneuverability, so I need you to act as decoys and draw fire away from the Indomitable while we target their weapon systems. They spent the next 10 minutes planning their desperate defense, and Vasquez found herself impressed by the tactical acumen of the civilian captains who might not have military training, but understood their vessel's capabilities and limitations with expert precision. On the Indomitable's gun deck, Sergeant Drake gathered his Marines for what would likely be their final briefing, and his squad consisted of 20 men and women who had volunteered to defend humanity's interests in a hostile galaxy. Listen up, he barked in the time-honored tradition of sergeants throughout human history. The captain's buying us time to hurt these bastards, and our job is to repel boarders if they try to take the ship. Sarge, shouldn't we be manning escape pods? Private Morrison asked, with the kind of innocent optimism that hadn't yet been beaten out of him by combat experience. And go where exactly? Drake replied. We're in deep space surrounded by enemy vessels, and the nearest friendly port is 6 hours away, and I don't know about you, but I'd rather die fighting than suffocate in an escape pod while waiting for rescue that might never come. The Marines checked their weapons with practiced efficiency and made their peace with whatever gods or philosophies they believed in, because they were human and humans, had been preparing for final stands since Thermopylae and the Alamo and 1,000 other last defenses that lived on in memory. In engineering, Rodriguez worked frantically to squeeze every last erg of power from the damaged reactor, while her reduced crew performed miracles with duct tape and determination. Chun, I need you to reroute power from life support in the aft sections, she called out over the noise. Anyone who's not essential to combat operations needs to move forward and seal the aft hatches. Rodriguez, that's going to reduce our operational effectiveness if we survive this. Chum pointed out over the comm. Those systems will take hours to bring back online. If we survive this, I'll personally rebuild every system with my bare hands. Rodriguez shot back. But right now I need that power to keep the shields from collapsing in the first salvo on the bridge. Vasquez watched the chronometer count down the final minutes before the Vrin battle group entered weapons range and found herself thinking about her daughter who would have. The Indomitable's weapons spoke defiance into the void as railgun rounds and the last of their missiles streaked toward the Vrin battle group. Captain Vasquez watched the tactical display with the detached focus of someone who had accepted death and now worked only to make it meaningful. The lead cruiser's shields flared as human ordnance found its mark and sensors. Arrays exploded in showers of debris. Direct hit on the cruiser's forward sensor cluster. Webb reported with grim satisfaction. They're reverting to backup systems, and their targeting solution degraded by approximately 30%. But the Vrin response was overwhelming in its coordinated fury as 8 warships opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams and missile salvos converged on the human vessel from multiple vectors, and no amount of tactical brilliance could avoid that much firepower concentrated on a single target. Brace for impact, Chun called out unnecessarily because the bridge crew had already strapped themselves into their stations and prepared for the punishment that was about to rain down on them. The first salvo struck the Indomitable like the fist of an angry god, and the forward shields collapsed entirely. Under the assault, secondary explosions rippled through the hull as armor plating vaporized and internal bulkheads buckled. Park fought the helm controls as the ship tumbled from the impact, and proximity alarms screamed their warnings about imminent system failures. In engineering, Rodriguez was thrown across the room as an energy beam punched through the hull just meters from her position. She felt something in her back snap with a sensation that was more surprising than painful, and suddenly her legs wouldn't respond to her commands. Medical to engineering, she gasped into her headset while dragging herself toward the reactor. Controls using only her arms, her team rushed to help, but she waved them off with desperate urgency. Forget about me and get the reactor stabilized, she ordered through gritted teeth. If we lose power now, everyone dies. Chun worked his console frantically as damage reports flooded in from every section of the ship. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. He announced while his voice remained professionally calm despite the chaos. Casualties are mounting, and we've lost contact with the aft sections entirely. The civilian convoy vessels scattered according to their planned pattern and drew fire from several Vryn destroyers who broke formation to pursue what appeared to be easy targets. But the Tauran freighter captain proved surprisingly adept at evasive maneuvers as she threaded her bulky vessel through the debris field at velocities that should have been impossible for something that size. Humans taught me that sometimes the impossible is merely the thing you haven't tried yet. She transmitted to her crew as her ship dodged another missile salvo by mere meters. The human merchant vessel actually managed to damage a Vryn destroyer when its captain executed a maneuver that violated every safety regulation ever written. He dumped his entire cargo bay of industrial chemicals into space and then detonated it with a precisely aimed shot from his emergency flare gun. The resulting explosion wasn't as powerful as a military weapon, but it caught the pursuing destroyer completely by surprise and fouled their sensor systems with exotic particles on. The Indomitable's bridge Vasquez watched her crew fight with everything they had despite knowing the outcome was inevitable. "Webb, what's our ammunition status?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Railgun ammunition depleted," Webb reported flatly. "Missiles are down to our last 4 birds, and point defense systems are at 20% capacity," which meant they had perhaps one more meaningful salvo before they were reduced to throwing wrenches out the airlock in defiance. Vasquez studied the tactical display and calculated angles with the ruthless efficiency of someone who refused to waste their final shots. "Target those last missiles on the second cruiser's bridge section," she ordered. "If we're going down, then I want to take their command structure with us." The Indomitable's last missiles streaked toward their target as the crew watched and hoped and prayed to whatever deities might listen to the prayers of desperate spacers. 3 missiles were intercepted by point defense fire, but the 4th slipped through the defensive screen and impacted directly on the cruiser's command tower. The explosion was satisfying in its violence as the cruiser's bridge section disintegrated and sent the massive warship into an uncontrolled tumble. It wouldn't be enough to turn the tide, but it was a final gesture of defiance that said humans would hurt you even as you killed them. "Enemy cruiser disabled," Webb confirmed. "But Captain, the remaining vessels are moving into final attack positions, and we have no weapons left to respond." Vasquez nodded slowly because there was nothing more to be said. They had fought well and bought the convoy precious time to escape, and now they would face whatever came next with the dignity that befitted people who had chosen duty over survival. "All hands abandon ship," she ordered quietly. "Get to the escape pods and scatter in different vectors, and maybe some of you will be recovered by Concordat forces before your air runs out. Belay that order." Chun interrupted from his station, and his voice carried an edge of excitement that seemed wildly inappropriate given their circumstances. "Captain, I'm reading new contacts on long-range sensors, and they're broadcasting Concordat IFF codes." Vasquez's head snapped around to stare at her first officer. "What?" she demanded. "They weren't supposed to be here for another 4 hours. They pushed their engines past safe limits," Webb reported as he pulled up the sensor data. "Multiple Concordat cruisers and destroyer escorts inbound at velocities. That should be impossible for their drive systems and Captain. They're transmitting that they received testimony from the convoy about our engagement." The tactical display updated to show 8 Concordat warships burning hard toward the combat zone and trailing plasma from engines that were running far beyond their RATED specifications. The Vryn battle group clearly saw them too, because their formation began to shift defensively as they reassessed the tactical situation Commander Thale watched from his damaged destroyer as the situation transformed from certain victory into potential disaster, and found himself experiencing something that might have been relief mixed with professional frustration. All ships, break off engagement and withdraw to Rally Point Delta. He transmitted. We cannot fight both the damaged human vessel and a fresh Concordat battle group. The Vrin warships began their withdrawal with practiced efficiency and left behind only wreckage and expanding debris clouds as evidence of the fierce battle that had raged in this patch of empty space on the Indomitable's bridge. The crew sat in stunned silence as they processed the fact that they were going to survive. After all, then someone started laughing, and the sound spread like a contagion until even Vasquez found herself joining in with the slightly hysterical laughter of people who had faced death and been granted an unexpected reprieve. Damage control teams, get those fires under control, she ordered once she had composed herself. Medical teams, priority treatment to engineering, and someone tell me why we're not getting responses from the aft sections. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency repairs and casualty assessments as the Concordat fleet arrived and established a defensive perimeter around the battered human warship. Vasquez walked through the damaged sections of her vessel and witnessed firsthand the price they had paid for their victory in engineering. She found Rodriguez strapped to a medical stretcher while corpsmen worked to stabilize her spine. "Captain," the engineer greeted her with a weak smile. "I'm told I'll be eating through a straw for the next few months, but the reactor's still running. You saved this ship," Vasquez told her while kneeling beside the stretcher. "And I'm personally recommending you for the Concordat Medal of Valor. Just put it on my tab." Rodriguez joked before the painkillers dragged her into unconsciousness. The final casualty count was brutal. 43 dead and 68 wounded out of a crew complement of 215. Every death felt personal to Vasquez because she had made the decision to engage, and she would carry the weight of those losses for the rest of her life. But there were also moments of grace amid the tragedy. Like when the torn freighter captain transported over to the Indomitable with a delegation of convoy survivors who insisted on thanking the human crew personally. "You fought for us when you had no obligation," the Tarn said, while her translator struggled to convey the emotional depth of her words. "And you stood between us and death without hesitation or calculation of personal cost. We did what anyone would do," Vasquez replied, though she knew that wasn't true, because very few species would have taken the risks that her crew had accepted as simply part of the job. That is precisely the point. The Kalathi transport commander added, "What you consider normal behavior is extraordinary by any other species standards, and my government has already transmitted a formal petition to the Concordat Council requesting full military partnership." For humanity, Vasquez found herself momentarily speechless, because humanity had been struggling for recognition as more than junior members of the Concordat ever since first contact, and now apparently they had earned that recognition by doing what came naturally 3 days later after emergency repairs had made the Indomitable space-worthy enough.